government and rebel leaders resume yet another round of peace talks amid renewed fighting, and Liberia experiences a logjam of Ebola-related dead bodies.
What we are getting is this from the community that these individuals should not be buried in the communities in die.
Louis Brown is Liberia's information minister, and could a vaccine to cure Ebola be in the making? Those stories plus Mark Omar's sports and our listeners of the day are coming up on Daybreak Africa. The three-day U.S.-Africa Summit enters its second day today, Tuesday, as the Obama administration works to strengthen ties with Africa. At one of the forums yesterday, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry told about 50 African leaders that the United States is ready to strengthen its business ties with Africa. As Tom Dawkins reports, Kerry said Africa's economic growth benefits both Africa and the United States.
About 50 presidents and other top officials from across Africa are in Washington for the Africa Leaders Summit. Kicking off a series of events, Secretary of State John Kerry says a dramatic transformation is possible in Africa, and it's possible within the next few years.
Prosperity can actually replace poverty, and cooperation can actually triumph over conflict.
A number of the world's fastest-growing economies are in Africa, yet U.S. businesses have generally been hesitant to invest. He urged African ministers to embrace free market ideals and U.S.-Africa cooperation.
So I say unabashedly, we want and we will work hard to get more American companies to invest in Africa. We also want more African companies to invest here in the United States, and there's no reason that they shouldn't.
But he also called for greater transparency and a commitment to fight corruption.
To do so will take courage. And yes, it sometimes means assuming risks. But fighting corruption lifts more than a country's balance sheet. Transparency and accountability attract greater investment. Transparency and accountability create a more competitive marketplace.
Kerry is holding individual meetings with at least 8 African leaders on Monday. President Obama is due to address a U.S.-Africa business forum on Tuesday. Pam Dawkins, VOA News, the State Department.
An advisor to U.S. House of Representatives member Karen Bass says the Congresswoman will today, Tuesday, host African leaders and American business officials at a forum of growth and opportunity in Africa as part of the ongoing U.S.-Africa Summit. Dan Roth tells reporter Peter Clarty that the meeting will discuss the future of U.S.-Africa economic relations and the upcoming discussion in Congress to renew the Africa Growth and Opportunity Agreement, known as AGOA.
She is hosting 3 panels with leaders from some of Africa's highest economic leaders to talk with Americans about how we forge and strengthen that bond between the United States and Africa. We have increased trade between the United States and Africa, and it's benefited both the United States and Africa with increased jobs and increased prosperity. And we really want to grow on that and have an open and honest discussion about how we can do that and really levy up the importance of the countries of the African continent for the United States.
How will they explore possibilities of strengthening bilateral, deepening bilateral and multilateral relations between Washington and the continent?
Absolutely. So one of the greatest tools that we have is the Africa Growth and Opportunity Agreement, or AGOA. And it was forged when President Clinton was president, and it really has helped to increase trade between the United States and Africa. And AGOA is set to expire in 2015, and that's AGOA as we know it. And so really this is a wonderful opportunity for us to really have a great dialogue of what is working under the agreement and, frankly, how the agreement can be better. Congress will very soon begin the part of discussing the reauthorization of the trade agreement. And so we want to get from people from Africa really what they've learned on the ground so we can build on that, so when we go to reauthorize AGOA that it's stronger and is actually working better for the continent of Africa and for the United States.
What should be the takeaway of this meeting, this Tuesday's meeting?
Well, really this meeting, it's 15 people both from the United States and Africa, and it includes economic officers from the African Union, It includes former heads of state from Africa. It also includes business administrators from the United States. And so really the discussion is, what are some tangible ways as we move into the discussion of AGOA that it will be better? So really it is and I think what is one of the wonderful things about AGOA, it is one of the few both bipartisan and also where the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate are in agreement that it is successful. And so we know that we want to renew it, but the real question is, how do we improve upon it? And also that we don't wait until the last minute, but also we don't see the September 2015 as when we start the discussion, but how do we make sure that we renew it well ahead of time so that it doesn't run out and that businesses don't have the uncertainty that they might have if we wait until the last minute.
So how will this discussion help in the possible approval or extension of AGOA? Because a lot of African countries have been calling for its extension. It appears the process is a bit slow for them, and these are concerns they've expressed. So how will this help in that directive?
And so it's really to change the mindset, and that's where the summit youth policy is really bringing together, is that we are seeing and talking and really thinking about Africa.
Dan Roth is Communications Director and Policy Advisor to U.S. House of Representatives member Karen Bass. He spoke with reporter Peter Clarke from Washington, D.C. This week's U.S.-Africa Summit is an effort by the Obama administration to strengthen American ties with the continent of Africa. But Zimbabwe, which desperately needs investment from abroad, is not represented because of President Robert Mugabe's human rights record. Sebastian Mofu reports for VOA from Harare on what that means for Zimbabwe.
Talking to African journalists by telephone ahead of the meeting, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, said the summit was a historic event.
The theme of the summit is investing in the next generation. We think this reflects the common ambitions that we share with the people and governments of Africa to leave our nations better for future generations by making gains in peace and security and good governance and economic development.
But one of those missing that fruitful discussion is Zimbabwean leader Robert Mugabe. The 90-year-old Zimbabwean leader is subject to U.S. travel and financial sanctions because of his poor human rights record and history of alleged election rigging. Pesai Ruhanya, who heads the Zimbabwe Democracy Institute, says Zimbabwe stands to lose a lot by not being represented at this summit.
So the meeting in Washington is important for international trade, among those countries that are meeting Obama, and also countries that are looking for foreign direct investment. They will be interacting with American conglomerates and the international business institutions that want to invest in developing economies such as Nigeria is now the leading economy in Africa, followed by South Africa. So it's important that those countries meet, particularly in America, where the heart speed of international business.
Zimbabwe's economy has alternated between depression and weak growth for nearly 15 years, ever since Mr. Mugabe's government began to forcibly drive white commercial farmers off their land. Foreign companies are generally reluctant to invest in the country because of political turmoil and Mr. Mugabe's nationalistic economic policies. Zimbabwe's Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister, Christopher Mutsvangwa, agrees with Ruhanya that the summit is crucial for Africa. But when it comes to Zimbabwe, he says the government is at peace not being present for the discussions.
Of course, we in Zimbabwe, we are not invited. We have no misgivings whether we have, when America decides to exclude us. It's a country which has never been comfortable with an assertive African nationalist. We broke strictures from anybody, including America.
The Obama administration was one of the Western governments that refused to recognize Mr. Mugabe's re-election in July 2018, which the opposition MDC party says was rigged. Sebastian Mofu, VOA News, Harare.
You're listening to Daybreak Africa on the Voice of America. I'm James Button in Washington. Today's Tuesday, August 5th, and please send your comments and opinions to Daybreak Africa at voanews.com. Daybreak Africa time is coming up at 16 minutes past the hour. Liberian officials say they are working hard to correct the problems that have led to the backlog of the collection and burial of Ebola-related dead bodies. Some local media reports say an overwhelmed healthcare system has led to dead bodies being dumped in some communities and left unburied for as many as 5 days. One report said as many as 37 dead bodies were found Sunday in one of the boroughs of the capital, Monrovia. A pileup of uncollected and unburied dead bodies has led to protests in some communities. This comes as the World Health Organization said Monday that the death toll from the Ebola outbreak in West Africa has reached 900, with 255 deaths in Liberia. Liberia's Information Minister Louise Brown tells me President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf has ordered the cremation of Ebola-related dead bodies to relieve the logjam.
We're pleased that people are beginning to follow the directives of the government not to bury their own. The point we're making is when the retrieval teams go into these communities to retrieve bodies, usually they follow the safety protocols and they attempt to bury these bodies after the protocols are exhausted in the communities so family members can have knowledge of where their loved ones were buried. What we are getting is resistance even from the community that these individuals should not be buried in the communities in which they reside. And therefore it has caused a backlog and a slow pace at which retrieval teams have been in action. And so on Sunday, the president confirmed a decision for cremation of the body.
So you are saying that the government has been a little bit slow, or the medical people are being a little bit slow in picking up the bodies?
Well, yes, there's been a slow pace because there was a backlog being developed, because as people were picking up bodies, communities were not permitting them to be buried in their communities. And so it had a backlog of bodies with no place to be buried. And therefore resulted to cremation, which you know is not a part of our culture, but we've had to do to adjust to these concerns, to lower the resistance, and to find a way to accelerate the access of retrieval tools and the rate at which they're able to respond to the population.
According to one account I read, there's a hotline that people are supposed to call, and whenever that hotline is called, some people have complained that they are not getting through.
That is a possibility, but we've begun to address that. They had hotlines from at least 2 of the major GSM service providers. On Sunday, we enter into an additional arrangement to increase each line to each number to be able to accommodate an additional 30 lines. The situation is of such that more and more people are making calls, more and more responses are needed. In fact, we made an appeal for volunteers to come out today. That calling system, it was directly up until yesterday under the Ministry of Health. We've removed that to another facility to accommodate volunteers. People are volunteering to answer and to get the message out to retrieval centers.
Liberia's Information Minister Louise Brown was speaking with me from the capital, Monrovia. While there is currently no cure or vaccine for Ebola, Dr. Anthony Fauci of the U.S. National Institutes of Health said Monday that a vaccine is being developed and could soon go to trial. Dr. Thomas Geisberg has researched on the deadly virus for more than 2 decades as a professor at the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. Geisberg talks to Ricky Stryak about the possibilities for a future vaccine and treatment for Ebola.
There are 4 or 5 different vaccines now that can completely protect lab animals against Ebola, and my guess is it's one of the vaccines that NIH has been working on.
What has been stopping us from having a vaccine all this time, and why is it different now?
The problem and the challenges in the past has been there's a very small global market for Ebola vaccines, so there really hasn't been a financial incentive for a large pharmaceutical company to make an
only took a few months to say, okay, we can have a vaccine in September that will be able to help.
I do think that certainly this outbreak, being the largest Ebola outbreak on record, has raised awareness. And I think certainly there's been an increased concern, and particularly in the United States. So I think that has facilitated or enhanced the possibilities of developing a vaccine, or basically fast-tracking the process a little bit. I still think it's probably very optimistic to think that a licensed vaccine would be available that quickly. I think more likely perhaps a vaccine that could be used for compassionate use or, in an emergency situation is perhaps more of what is being discussed.
When you say emergency situation, do you mean right now people in Freetown and Monrovia and Conakry would be getting this vaccine?
I'm not necessarily saying or suggesting that. I think the idea of vaccinating different populations is controversial. I think a well-characterized vaccine that perhaps could be used for first responders or medical staff is maybe a place to start, but this is all speculation.
And how is your research going? Was it in March that you guys received new funding?
So on the 1st of March, we received a grant from the National Institutes of Health here in the United States to develop what we think are three of the most promising post-exposure treatments against Ebola. And we picked these three because they're the three that have shown the most success in protecting non-human primates against Ebola.
Is there any talk of using your treatments yet on any of the people that come down with Ebola?
Yeah, certainly it's had some increased awareness. There's been a lot of interest. The whole issue of treating the cases is pretty complex. And we have corporate partners, and I really don't want to go into any discussion on that. One of the vaccines that we developed that it can either be used as a preventive vaccine or it can be used as a post-exposure treatment. So this vaccine actually was used in a compassionate use situation back, I think, around 2010, where a worker in a laboratory in Germany had an accident with Ebola, and the vaccine was used as a post-exposure treatment.
That was Dr. Thomas Geisbert, a professor at the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. We're speaking to Ricky Sharak from Galveston, Texas. Warring factions in South Sudan say they are committed to forging a peace deal to end more than 7 months of fighting as government and rebel delegates began another round of talks on Monday in Addis Ababa. As news Gabe Gaslow reports, an early sign of tension emerged on Monday as the government criticized mediators for not enforcing past agreements. Representatives from South Sudan's government and the rebel opposition are meeting to make another push for a peace deal in their country. At least 10,000 people have been killed and more than 1 million displaced in South Sudan since the conflict between supporters of President Salva Kiir and his political rival Riek Machar descended into fighting and inter-ethnic violence in December. Past ceasefire agreements between the two sides, mediated by the East African group IGAD, have been violated soon after being signed. Speaking at the opening of the talks, a representative of South Sudan's government, Nial Deng Nial, blamed IGAD mediators for failing to hold the opposition, known as the SPLMA in opposition, accountable for past violations.
The level of consequences have only emboldened the SPLM and the opposition to back up its armed campaign against
the two sides have blamed each other for the collapse of previous ceasefire deals and the continuation of fighting that is centered around South Sudan's Jonglei, Unity, and Upper Nile states. Opposition Representative Diou Matok defended the role of IGAD, which has sent teams to South Sudan to monitor the conflict.
The SPLM is committed to peaceful solutions affecting South Sudan. I want to express our confidence in the future.
Another key item on the agenda is the formation of a transitional government of national unity. A previous agreement called for the new government to be established by August 10th. That deadline is looking increasingly unlikely to be met. Gabe Joslow, VOA News, Nairobi.
It's time now for Daybreak Africa Sports. Here is Mark Oman in Johannesburg, South Africa. Very good Tuesday morning to you, Mark.
Good morning, James. In our Daybreak Africa Sports news, we focus on football. All football matches are suspended in Sierra Leone as a precaution against the spread of the deadly Ebola virus that is currently ravaging parts of the country. The Sierra Leone Football Association announced the suspension in Freetown on Monday following the declaration of a public health emergency by the country's head of state, Ernest Bai Koroma. This puts Sierra Leone's 2015 Orange Africa Cup of Nations qualifying campaign in jeopardy. They are scheduled to host the Democratic Republic of Congo on the 10th of September. On a more cheerful note, FIFA Under-17 World Cup champions Nigeria outclassed the Democratic Republic of Congo 4-0 in the return leg of the Africa Under-17 Championship qualifying in Abeokuta, Ogun State, southwest Nigeria on Sunday. Consequently, Nigeria advanced to the penultimate stage of the qualifiers courtesy of a 5-0 aggregate. Guinea beat Morocco 3-1 on aggregate. Benin tipped Mali 1-0. Egypt dismissed the Republic of Congo 2-0. South Africa outclassed Tanzania 4-0. Cameroon beat Burkina Faso 2-0 as Angola edged Mozambique 3-2 and Gabon dismissed Ethiopia 3-0. Elsewhere, Senegal and Togo drew 1-0. However, Togo advanced on the away goal rule. Zambia thrashed Botswana 6-0 as Uganda beat Rwanda 7-2 on aggregate. Meanwhile, defending champions Ivory Coast, Ghana and Tunisia progressed to the next stage of the qualifiers after their opponents withdrew from the competition. Meanwhile, the stage is set for the main qualifying contest for the 2015 Orange Africa Cup of Nations after 7 teams advanced from the qualifiers over the weekend. These were Botswana, Lesotho, Mozambique, Malawi, Rwanda, Sierra Leone and Uganda. 28 teams will battle for 15 spots up for grabs to the Nations Cup in Morocco next January. Defending champions Nigeria are seeded in Group A with Rwanda, Sudan and South Africa. Algeria, Ethiopia, Malawi and Mali are in Group B. Group C include Angola, Burkina Faso, Gabon and Lesotho. Group D comprises of Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ivory Coast and Sierra Leone. Group E has Ghana, Guinea, Togo and Uganda, while Cape Verde Islands, Mozambique, Niger and Zambia are in Group F. Group G brings together Botswana, Egypt, Senegal and Tunisia. Finally, Ghana challenge hosts Canada at the start of their campaign at the FIFA Women's Under-20 World Cup in Toronto today, Tuesday. And that's it for Daybreak Africa Sports News. I'm Mark Ouma in Johannesburg, South Africa. Back to you, James, in Washington.
Thank you, Mark. Have a good day. Here's our listener mail for this Tuesday morning, August 5th.
Nigerians are urging the federal government of Nigeria to close all her borders due to fight the Ebola virus in Nigeria. I wish to also say that the federal government of Nigeria should ensure that all the efforts and social agents that such a virus can be transmitted through should also be sanitized. Albert Alagbo from the Department of Public Administration, Attorney General Polytechnic, Ebonyi State, Nigeria. Thank you.
We thank you, listener, for your comments, and please send your viewpoints to daybreakafrica@voanews.com. That's it for this Tuesday, August 5th edition of Daybreak Africa. On behalf of the Daybreak Africa crew, I'm James Bucky, Washington saying, have a very nice day, Africa.
Do you love African music? Music time in Africa. This is Heather Maxwell. And if you do, Music Time in Africa is the place here for you. Tune in to listen on the radio Saturdays and Sundays at 0900, 2000, and 2100 You can also listen to the show day or night on the internet. Go to voanews.com and voaafrica.com and click on Music Time in Africa. Your past and present radio shows and a link to my blog, African Music Treasure. This is Africa through its own music, oldies, classics, traditional music, Afro-pop, and fusion. You get it all right here in one beautiful bundle at VOA's Music Time in Africa.
From Washington, this is VOA's International Edition. Coming up, the latest on the Gaza conflict. Nigeria reporting another case of Ebola. Africa summit underway here in Washington, plus European leaders marking the outbreak of World War I. Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Norman. Israel and Hamas have agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire in the Gaza Strip beginning early today. The announcement came late Monday in Cairo, where Egyptian mediators held talks with the Palestinian delegation on terms of a durable truce in Gaza. Earlier on Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the country's military forces were nearing the end of their push to destroy tunnels Hamas has used to store weapons and infiltrate Israel. And here in Washington, State Department spokesperson Jennifer Psaki said in a statement that the U.S. strongly supports the latest proposal for a ceasefire and urges both parties to respect it completely. My colleague Michael Lippin is just back from a 16-day visit to Israel to be with family and friends. I spoke with him late Monday about his visit and what he experienced.
I spent most of the time in Tel Aviv, but I also made a couple of day trips to Jerusalem. In fact, I was there yesterday. As you mentioned, there were 2 attacks in the city today, including a hit-and-run attack with a vehicle. In this case, it was a tractor. It was the first such attack in Jerusalem in 5 years. I didn't notice anything unusual when I was walking around central Jerusalem yesterday, although Israeli police had been anticipating that militants might carry out attacks in the city in revenge for Israeli attacks in Gaza.
Let's talk about the conflict. How did that affect your time in Tel Aviv?
Well, Tel Aviv is the financial hub of Israel. It's located on the Mediterranean coast in the center of the country, and it's about a 45-minute drive west from Jerusalem. Militants in Gaza have fired more than 3,200 rockets at Israel in the past month. Most of them are shorter-range missiles targeting southern Israel, but dozens of medium-range rockets also have reached as far as Tel Aviv and its surrounding suburbs. Now, whenever a rocket is fired from Gaza and the Israeli military determines that it's headed toward a populated area, air raid sirens are broadcast in those areas. Now, I heard sirens in Tel Aviv 7 times altogether on 7 separate days. Now, 3 of those were in the late morning, 2 of them were in the late afternoon, and 2 of them were also in the early morning. One was at 2:30 a.m., and another one at 6 a.m. last Saturday morning. Now, that's a Saturday is a rest day when many people in Israel sleep in, including me. So I woke up when I heard the siren. I quickly put on some shorts. I went into the stairwell of the apartment building that I was staying in, and then I started recording the tail end of that siren, and we can play a little clip of that for you now. When sirens are being broadcast, you hear a couple of booms from interceptions of the rockets by Iron Dome. That's Israel's missile defense system. I did hear quite a few of those booms myself.
You talked about going into the stairwell of the apartment building. What do Israelis who have been experiencing this typically do when they hear one of these sirens?
Well, authorities are constantly reminding people to go to a safe place inside a building like a stairwell or a shelter and stay away from windows or open spaces. Now, that gives you more protection in case a rocket is not intercepted and makes an impact somewhere. In most cases, though, the rockets are intercepted, but another problem is you have bits of debris falling to the ground, and those pieces also could cause injury.
As VOA's Michael Lippin just back from Israel. In other news, Libya's new transitional government on Monday said the country urgently needs a solution to the violence spiraling across the North African country. But analysts in Washington tell VOA Sharon Bain they are not optimistic about prospects for a quick end to the fighting.
Libya's Justice Minister Salah al-Marghani on Monday called for unity in the country and an end to the violence. He says the transitional government is proposing an urgent vision, at the core of which is to use all means possible to produce a balanced situation in Libya. Hundreds have died in the recent struggle for power between warring militia groups, the military, and breakaway military factions. The fighting has forced most countries to evacuate their nationals. Violence in the capital and in Benghazi has made those cities so unsafe that al-Marghani and lawmakers from Libya's newly elected parliament were forced to hold their first session Monday in the eastern city of Tobruk. Islamist groups who lost seats in the last parliamentary elections boycotted Monday's session. Libya's central government also has been unable to protect its significant oil and gas sectors from rebel forces. Unable to directly export themselves, Militia commanders are taking those assets hostage for increased economic and political leverage. Shannon Bain, VOA News, Washington.
The World Health Organization is now saying the Ebola virus outbreak in West Africa has taken nearly 900 lives since it was first detected in Guinea in March. The total number of confirmed cases of the often deadly virus reported so far is just over 1,600. In Sierra Leone Monday, President Ernest Koroma appealed to his countrymen to work together to fight the deadly disease, warning, in his words, the very essence of the nation is at stake. In Liberia, many healthcare workers are too frightened to show up for work. Amos Richards is a physician's assistant.
The health workers think that they are not protected. They don't have the requisite materials to use as to protect themselves against the Ebola diseases. So many of the health workers, including physician assistants, nurses, and so forth, are staying home.
Meanwhile, troops in both Liberia and Sierra Leone have been deployed to quarantine communities affected by the disease. The World Bank, again, is saying it would provide $200 million to Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone to help those countries contain the outbreak. World Bank President Jim Yong Kim said he's very worried that more lives are at risk unless the epidemic is contained. And officials in Nigeria are saying a second person has been diagnosed with Ebola following the case of a Liberian-American man who died in Lagos less than 2 weeks ago. Heather Burdock reporting from Abuja. Officials say 8 other people are being quarantined and 3 are awaiting test results.
The Nigerian government says it is increasing health screenings at airports and international land borders after tests confirmed over the weekend that a Nigerian doctor has Ebola. The Lagos doctor cared for Patrick Sawyer, a Liberian-American finance consultant who died of Ebola on July 25th, a few days after traveling from Liberia to Nigeria through Ghana and Togo. The doctor, whose name was not released, is currently being treated in isolation. Minister of Health Onabuchi Chukwu says the government is reassessing calls to close some Nigerian borders on a daily basis.
Regarding the issue of whether we should close our border, we still maintain that for now we are not doing that for a number of reasons, but if it becomes necessary, we will do that.
Ebola has killed more than 800 people this year alone as it has spread to Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and now Nigeria. So far, the outbreak in Nigeria appears to be relatively contained, with 1 death and symptoms now showing in 8 currently isolated health workers who had direct contact with Sawyer. Humans catch Ebola either through handling or eating wild animals, or through contact with the blood or bodily fluids of an infected person. Bodies remain infectious after a person dies. Chukwu says officials are testing whether a body discovered in a morgue last week is carrying the Ebola virus. Authorities suspected the body was flown back to Nigeria after the person died of Ebola in a nearby country. The minister says Nigeria has moved to stop the import of bodies for burial from countries that have Ebola.
We should not bring back corpses from the 3 countries where we have the greatest number of cases. They should not bring back dead bodies. Better that dead bodies are buried where they've had issues, except where it is clear from the death certificate that it is not Ebola.
Ebola is one of the world's deadliest diseases with an up to 90% death rate. The death rate in the current West African outbreak is about 60%, a fact doctors attribute to early treatment. Heather Murdoch for VOA News, Abuja.
Later today, an evacuation plane will leave Monrovia, Liberia for the United States. On board will be a second American who has Ebola. Nancy Wright-Bull was a medical missionary in Monrovia where she contracted the disease. She worked alongside another American, Dr. Kent Brantley, who has Ebola and was flown back to the U.S. on Saturday. A special unit at Emory University Hospital in the southern U.S. city of Atlanta will receive Wright-Bull for treatment when she arrives. Dr. Governor Brantley is there right now, and on Monday, doctors said his condition is improving. Meanwhile, officials at New York's Mount Sinai Medical Center say a man suffering from a high fever and gastrointestinal problems arrived at their emergency room early Monday, and that he was quickly isolated. They say the patient recently traveled to a West African country where Ebola has been reported and is now undergoing tests to determine the cause of his illness. No other details about the man were given. Still ahead on the International Edition, an African Summit underway here in Washington.
News is mobile, and so are you. Get VOA on the go. Get VOA on Google Current. Get VOA News specifically made for your tablet and smartphone. Clean, simple, fast. Now available for Android or Apple phone or tablet. Download the Google Current app for free today. Get VOA on Google Current at voanews.com/current.
The Obama administration sought Monday to strengthen ties with Africa at an unprecedented summit with dozens of African leaders grappling with issues such as investment, poverty, terrorism, corruption, and deadly diseases. Nearly 50 African heads of state are attending the three-day summit on how to build democracy and raise investment in the continent, which is home to some of the world's fastest-growing economies and an expanding middle class. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden spoke Monday to a gathering of leaders from civil society organizations, such as the news media, private institutions, and other non-governmental groups which look out for the well-being of the people of their countries. He told them the future of Africa depends as much on them as it does on the heads of state who are attending this week's summit.
No democracy can survive without the active and intense participation of its people. You, the leaders of civil society, you empower your societies to succeed. You are the lifeblood. No man can survive without the blood coursing through its veins, and no democracy can survive and thrive without the active participation of its citizens. It's that simple. We had an American president named Thomas Jefferson. He said that if you want a society to be intelligent and free, it has to be informed. No society can function without being informed. But a civil society cannot exist, it cannot function absent certain basic underlying rights that are recognized by their government. They are universal rights. The freedom of expression, the freedom to express yourself, the freedom of association, the freedom to gather with whomever you wish to gather, and the freedom of assembly, to publicly assemble, to make clear the grievances and concerns of the people. These are universal and inseparable from democracy itself, in my view. And that's not just true in Africa. Around the world, nation-states, as they emerge, are dealing with the same kinds of issues, from fighting corruption to preventing economic favoritism, to creating effective systems, for the collection of revenue and equal and equitable distribution of services to all the people. No two societies, to state the obvious, are exactly the same. But in the 21st century, there are a clear set of rules that, in fact, are required to be followed in order to succeed. It's not possible to succeed for your people unless they have a chance to shape the policies of their government, identify problems and root out injustices, and find ways for groups to resolve their differences peacefully, to start businesses, to help your economies grow. And lastly, but in my view, maybe the most important, is to draw on the talents of all of your people,
U.S. Vice President Joe Biden. And also Monday at the Forum on African Civil Society, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry urged participants to push for democracy and individual rights in their countries. Mr. Kerry said the U.S. is genuinely happy to be hosting the Africa Summit.
What is happening and what can happen in Africa are both extraordinarily exciting concepts. This is a moment of amazing opportunity for Africa. And I think that's what brings all of you here. That's why we brought together leaders from 50 countries across Africa for this historic summit. It's also why we're determined to deepen our partnerships and to deliver on remarkable opportunities for peace, for security, for economic growth. Perhaps most importantly of all, in the context of what brings us here today, the empowerment of people through their government, through their civil society. I want to be clear about something. To get this moment right for the long term, which is what matters, to really drive change and create lasting opportunity, we need to invest in relationships not just with those who are in charge today, but with those who are pushing for change, and some of whom in the right opportunity of democracy and a process might be in charge in the future. Trust is the heart of governance, and that trust begins and ends with a strong and vibrant, inclusive, and independent civil society. That has been proven in country after country through all of history.
President Obama will address a U.S.-Africa Business Forum later today and take part in sessions focused on economic growth, regional security, and good governance on Wednesday. The U.S. is set to unveil nearly $1 billion in business deals, more funding for peacekeeping, and billions of dollars for food and power programs during the three-day summit. South African President Jacob Zuma is in Washington for the Africa Summit, and on Monday he spoke at the National Press Club from the podium, where he said South Africa's first black president, Nelson Mandela, had spoken about the time he was elected in 1994. Mr. Zuma said his country has come a long way since then.
We have laid a firm foundation for thriving democracy in a short space of time. Amongst our key achievements is the manner in which we have created an open democracy and an open society. We pride ourselves in having a progressive constitution that enshrines freedom and expression and that of the media. We are also proud of our well-established democratic processes, such as the holding of elections successfully and transparently every 5 years. In May this year, we cast our ballots for the 5th time, cheerfully, patiently, and in peace. Our democracy has come of age in a very short space of time.
South African President Jacob Zuma speaking Monday at the National Press Club here in Washington.
Visit our website at voanews.com. That's where you'll find in-depth reports, related stories, videos, and more from our team of correspondents. Or take the news with you by downloading podcasts of your favorite VOA programs. That's at voanews.com. Online news for a changing world.
Former foes gathered in Belgium on Monday to mark the 100th anniversary of the start of World War I. It's considered one of the grimmest episodes of Europe's history that laid the groundwork for the Second World War. Lisa Bryant has more from Paris.
Ceremony in Liège gathered heads of state and royalty from across Europe who paid homage to the nearly 17 million soldiers and civilians who died during World War I. They
placed white roses and a wreath at the Allied Memorial. On August 1st, 1914, Germany invaded neutral Belgium to gain access to France. Britain declared war on Germany the same day, unleashing 4 years of bloodshed that would forever mark Europe. In speeches, many, like King Philip of Belgium, applied lessons of the Great War to events today.
Le souvenir de la Première Guerre mondiale nous donne à réfléchir à la responsabilité.
King Philip said the anniversary was a time to reflect on the responsibility of leaders to preserve peace and bring unity, which remains a major challenge. Attending the ceremony included French President François Hollande and his German counterpart Joachim Gauck. On Sunday, the French and German presidents were in Alsace to mark the centenary of Germany's declaration of war on France.
Comment rester neutre lorsqu'un avion civil est abattu?
Once again, Mr. Hollande used the occasion to call for action against current bloodshed. He said it was impossible to remain neutral faced with events like the downing of a Malaysian airliner in Ukraine and conflicts in Iraq, Syria, and Gaza. Britain's Prince William recalled how European beachgoers in Belgium found their summer holiday shattered by the outbreak of the Great War.
During 4 terrible years, those same Europeans were engulfed by killing and destruction. Among the very first victims were the people of Belgium, whose resistance was as gallant as their suffering was great.
The war hit Liège early and hard. The city sustained 2 days of heavy shelling. On August 22nd, 1914, 70,000 soldiers were killed in a single day of fighting. Lisa Bryant for VOA News, Paris.
The White House press secretary, who was shot and suffered a devastating head wound in the 1981 assassination attempt on U.S. President Ronald Reagan, James Brady, has died. He died Monday at the age of 73. Brady's family says he suffered from a number of health problems as a blow. He was near President Reagan outside a Washington hotel when a gunman opened fire in an unsuccessful attempt to kill the president. Mr. Reagan was shot twice and recovered, while Brady was left paralyzed and permanently disabled. He went on to conduct a lifelong campaign for tighter U.S. gun controls. The U.S. law requiring background checks on gun buyers bears his name, and the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence is named after him as well. His name also appears on a plaque just outside the White House press briefing room, where Monday the current White House press secretary, Josh Earnest, spoke about James Brady.
I was aware that Mr. Brady was in failing health in recent days, and I was saddened when I first learned of that. He is somebody who I think really revolutionized this job, and even after he was wounded in that attack on the president, was somebody who showed his patriotism and commitment to the country by being very outspoken on an issue that was important to him and that he felt very strongly about. So he leaves the kind of legacy that I think that certainly this press secretary and all future press secretaries will aspire to live up to.
James Brady began his career in public service as a staff member in the office of Illinois Senator Everett Dirksen in the 1960s. He also served as press secretary to then-presidential candidate John Connally in 1979. After Connally dropped out of the race, Brady eventually became Director of Public Affairs for the Reagan-Bush Committee and then spokesperson for the office of the President-elect. After Mr. Reagan took office, Brady became White House press secretary. Many thanks, everyone, for joining us here on the Voice of America for International Edition. It's always good to have you with us. A reminder, the top world news is straight ahead. We hope you'll stay tuned for that. And also, if you find yourself out on the Internet and on Twitter following the conversation about what's happening around the world, you can find me there. I'm at VOA Norman. For our director, Tracy Carter, and engineer Dave Magnus, I'm Steve Norman in Washington. Have a great Tuesday.
This is Today in History. On August 5th, 1305, Scottish resistance leader William Wallace was captured by the English near Glasgow. He was taken to London, where he was put on trial and executed. On this day in 1858, the first telegraph line across the Atlantic Ocean was completed, largely through the efforts of American financier Cyrus West Field. Stretching nearly 3,200 kilometers on the ocean floor, the link reduced transatlantic communication from days to hours. On this day in 1963, the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union signed a treaty in Moscow banning nuclear tests in the atmosphere, space, and underwater. Underground tests, however, were still permitted. On this day in 1974, President Richard Nixon admitted he ordered the cover-up of the Watergate break-in for political and national security reasons. 3 days later, facing congressional articles of impeachment and dwindling public support, Nixon became the first U.S. president to resign from office. On this day in 2003, a powerful car bomb exploded outside the Marriott Hotel in downtown Jakarta, killing at least 10 people and wounding nearly 150. The suicide attack was blamed on Jamaat Islamiyah, an organization linked to the Al-Qaeda terrorist network. On August 5th, 1962, anti-apartheid leader Nelson Mandela was arrested for inciting unrest. Other charges and convictions would keep him in prison until 1990. Also on this date in 1962, actress Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Los Angeles home. I'm Dave DeForest with VOA's Today in History.
Next, an editorial reflecting the views of the United States government.
The leaders of some 50 African nations are gathering here in Washington to meet with U.S. government, business, and civil society leaders to discuss trade and investment, peace and regional stability, and governing for the next generation. The 3-day summit, August 4th, 5th, and 6th, will do more than that, however. It will also underscore our nation's commitment to Africa's people, democracy, and governance, and highlight our commitment to addressing issues that affect us all. Increased engagement with the nations of Africa is a high priority of U.S. foreign policy. President Barack Obama has emphasized how important this relationship is, beginning with his traveling to Ghana soon after taking office in 2009. Last year, presidential trips to South Africa, Tanzania, and Senegal saw the announcement of the Power Africa program, a U.S. initiative to help double access to electrical power in sub-Saharan Africa and spur greater economic development there. The 2014 U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, the first time that the vast majority of the continent's leaders have gathered here, is another step in our efforts to demonstrate U.S. commitment to the continent. Discussions will center on how to make progress in key areas that Africans themselves see as critical to the future of the continent: expanding trade and investment ties, promoting inclusive sustainable development, expanding cooperation on peace and security, and ensuring a better future for Africa's next generation. They will also focus on civil society, women, health, wildlife trafficking, and food security in a changing climate, as well as achieving a successful post-2015 development agenda during the official U.S. government-sponsored signature events. A related U.S.-Africa business forum is expected to result in hundreds of millions of dollars worth of agreements between U.S. and African firms. In addition, these events follow a week of meetings between 500 young African leaders and U.S. government, civil society, and business leaders, in which social policy, good governance, business, and technology were discussed as part of President Obama's Young African Leaders Initiative. Forging stronger personal connections among leaders advances America's and Africa's many, many shared priorities. It also fosters further future engagement and deepens the partnership between the American and African peoples as we both
pursue a better future for us all. That was an editorial reflecting the views of the United States government. If you have a comment, please write to editorials, VOA, Washington, D.C., 20237 USA. You may also comment and view all our current editorials at the VOA Editorials homepage, www.voanews.com/editorials.
Desire is the sky of the Lord. Relevantes.